Hey everybody, today the sword I'm going to talk about is going to be hard to keep on frame because it's pretty long. What we have here is the Striking Eagle Jian made by Chen in China. And these are, as far as I know, all of their swords are based on actual historical examples that they have available to them. And I don't know all of the history and details on it, but if you are interested in it, I recommend checking it out. They go into a little bit of the detail on their website over at Chen. But what we have here is an overall length of 58 and 3/4 inches with a blade length of 41 and 3/4 inches, an advertised weight of only 2 pounds 6.8 ounces, which is quite light for what is effectively a greatsword. We have a brass guard, pretty low profile brass guard, which is pretty common on Jian, and supposedly a peen pommel, although I don't see any peening marks, and it has a brass cap here, so maybe the peen is underneath and the brass cap is glued or pressed on. I would assume maybe both. Additionally, we have this cord wrapped grip. I assume it's wood core, but I haven't taken it off to look. And then this other cotton wrapping on the outside here, which I think will probably end up being controversial for some people. Some people may not like it. It is unconventional, but I don't find it to be uncomfortable. And even though these little threads here are loose, it's not distracting when using. At least I didn't find it to be distracting when using. So I kind of like it. It gives it something more of a rustic look. And this whole sword overall is actually really attractive. We have a pattern welded blade that's a mix of 1065 and T8 high carbon steels, a diamond cross section, and a really long blade with a pretty gradual distal taper. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is the sword is pretty whippy because it is so long and thin. Not really thin, it's actually pretty thick, but it's just very narrow. You can see how whippy it is. I don't think that that's very uncommon for Jian, but the result of that is cutting is challenging. It's not impossible, but it's challenging. Edge alignment has to be pretty perfect, and you have to really make sure that you're hitting a target with the cutting edge, which I think is right about here. If you hit that cutting edge, it is very possible to cut. I also understand that Jian, I think, are mostly swords that emphasize point control and thrusting more than cutting, even though I think that the role is something closer to a cut and thrust sword. I'm not at all an expert on Chinese swords, even though I really like them. But that seems like that's kind of what the intended use of these swords was something closer to a rapier, but with a little bit more of a cutting edge to them. The edge itself is really sharp, at least mine is. Again, this is a sample size of 1. It's not razor sharp, which is fine because generally swords shouldn't be razor sharp, but it is sharp enough that putting even a moderate amount of pressure on the blade with the tip of my finger, I wouldn't want to put any more or start to drag it across because it would decidedly bite. It did try to bite into the skin whenever I was checking the edge out. So a really nice edge, really decent edge geometry, which I'm sure, again, is a trade-off because the blade has to be a little bit thick, otherwise it would just be entirely too whippy. I mean, it's pretty whippy already, as you can see, which, again, considering what I think that these swords historically are used for, which is more of a thrust sword than a cut sword, it makes sense to have a little bit more flexibility in the blade. From a weight standpoint, I mentioned only 2 pounds 6.8 ounces on a 58-inch overall length, really 59 when you round up, and it's actually possible to hold this pretty comfortably with one hand. Not as comfortably as a dedicated one-handed sword, but considering this is in the greatsword length, I've heard people call this a Jian greatsword. You can see I'm not really having any discomfort holding it with one hand. It feels incredibly lightweight for as long as it is. Comes with a really nicely lacquered scabbard that's wood and aesthetically matches the sword pretty much exactly. I didn't do any destructive testing on the sword. I paid for it myself. I don't plan on doing any destructive testing, but I did accidentally bump the tip of the blade a couple of times into some gravel, and while I rounded the point a little bit, which is not that surprising because it's a pretty thin point, the blade edge itself never took any damage from hitting gravel, so it seems like it's going to hold up pretty well. It seems pretty well made. Again, I haven't done a destructive testing. I don't plan on it, so that might be something that someone discovers in the future in terms of how durable it is. But I overall really like this sword. I like having it in my collection. I like the way it handles, but it's just something very unique and not really a type of sword that you see recreated very often. You see plenty of Jian, but not a Jian that's this long. So I bought mine from Cult of Athena. I did try to buy it on Chen originally, but they were charging $150 for shipping. I was going to buy 2 swords from them at the time, which added up to $250 shipping, so thankfully Cult of Athena had it in stock. It was only about $50 more on the base price from Cult of Athena versus from Chen, but again, a difference of $20 shipping versus $150 shipping, so something to consider if you're planning on picking one of these up, putting some money back for it, is that shipping cost, if you buy direct from Chen, is going to be pretty expensive. Otherwise, you can try to get it locally. By locally, I mean in the US from a place like Cult of Athena, which again is where I got mine. So, this is Jay. Hope you liked the video. Please click like if you did. Be sure to subscribe to me if you haven't already. And hope you have a great day.